If I had a nickel for every time I made a thematically rich analysis video about Xenoblade 3 that amounted to me literally teaching the alphabet to my audience who, according to all analytics, are almost entirely adults, I would have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but the first time I did it, I made way more than 10 cents in ad revenue, so I'm glad it happened twice. But yeah, this isn't one of those videos that encompasses the entire Xeno series and engulfs everything in a big theory or whatever. However, this is a very spoilery Xenoblade 3 topic, including Future Redeem, so, you know, Xenoblade 1, 2, Future Connected, and Torna are all probably going to be implicitly spoiled there as well. Hopefully. I am really hoping that if you're watching this video, you understand that the Moebius in Xenoblade 3 are named after the letters of the English-Latin alphabet, so specifically the 26 letters that appear in Standard English. And that's not going to take a big explanation. But, while for almost the entire alphabet, the positioning of each letter relative to the other ones in the order you list them in standardized English is not important. For 4 of them, it definitely is though. My last alphabet video explored some of that, talking about why there's no definitive answer for the identity of Moebius A. And while I didn't really mention Z a lot there, obviously the fact that the 2 main antagonists of Xenoblade 3 are the beginning of the alphabet and the end of the alphabet, yeah, there's kind of something there for obvious reasons. Especially because, in terms of the spectrum of their ideas, they are opposite extremes that are both harmful for humanity. Zed does not want to progress into the future at all, completely ignoring the wishes of Klaus and the people of the worlds of Xenoblade 1 and 2, while Alpha wants to move forward at all costs, completely abandoning history and anyone who was present for the old worlds, which, while on paper is something closer to what those people wanted, is still not in spirit what they did, because everyone deserves a chance for a better future, even if they were around and still carry baggage from the old world with them. There's also the fact that the symbol of the protagonist of this game is the Ouroboros. So the beginning and the end are connected to each other through that link, and yeah, that actually secretly puts the 2 bad guys, even if their ideologies are completely opposite, right next to each other, because people whose stated goals are exterminating large groups of other people for their own personal gain are bad, regardless of what the underlying motivation for doing so is. Obviously, it's a lot deeper than that, but you know what I'm getting at here. The other reason they are A and Z is because the Bible again. And that is a reference to the first piece of dialogue that appears in the entire Xeno series, as Xenogears opens with specifically the King James version of Revelations 22:13. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. So like, yeah, that's kind of a thing. Obviously, both Alvis in Xenoblade 1 and Alpha in 3 have dialogue heavily calling back to this as well, showing that it can be interpreted from a benevolent and a malevolent perspective. And Alpha is the first, being a form of Ontos who existed prior to the Xenoblade 1 and 2 worlds, let alone Ionios, while Zed is the last threat of the old worlds before the people can finally move on to the future together, as he came into existence the same time those worlds died. Alpha, being a form of Ontos, was the beginning of Ionios, as Origin was based on the Ontos core crystal, and Zed was the end of Ionios, as the world started falling apart with his death. So then, whether or not you list the alphabet just in order or have it circling around in a loop, what happens when you try to get as far away from the 2 main antagonists as possible? Get as far away from A and Z. Either way, you're going to find yourselves at letters 13 and 14 in the alphabet. And fans of Xenoblade 3 might be intimately familiar with these 2 letters already because, well, they are M and N. So, like, yeah, I'm mostly memeing by hyping up dropping the name of some letters here, but it is pretty significant that Noah and Mio's names, by design, have letters that are right next to each other, and are right in the middle of the 2 extremes of Alpha and Zed. They come from different countries, different backgrounds even within Ionios, and different original worlds, but in discovering that they're a lot more alike than they are different, they're able to unite not just their small friend group, but the entire world, and push back not just against Zed and his control over Ionios, but the lingering effects of Alpha's takeover as well, in order to forge the correct future for everyone. This is all well and good, and I think it does add some extra layers to Xenoblade 3, but what I've described is like just Xenoblade 3. If you have reading comprehension, you can figure this out yourself just by playing through Xenoblade 3. So why am I making this an entire video? Well, you might be figuring out what I'm getting at here, but Noah and Mio are not the only time these letters show up. Firstly, it is possible to talk about N and M separately from Noah and Mio here for a little bit, and that's because of a few interesting things in contrast. Now, obviously, because the two console versions still use the same first letters of their regular names, they are next to each other in the alphabet despite the separation between them, but in this case, it's more of a melancholy look back at how close they used to be before N got lost in ambition and fell to the Moebius influence. Additionally, they're a bit swapped around, because in the party list, Noah comes before Mio, and Keves comes before Agnes. But if you're reading the alphabet in order, M comes before N, so if you're just listing the consoles in alphabetical order, M will come first, even though obviously N is a bit more important character overall. This also inverts things, because you then have the Agnes console listed before the Keves one, even though most of the time when the names of the nations are said out loud, it is Keves and then Agnes, which, interestingly, is in reverse alphabetical order, though, obviously, depending on how directly these lines were adapted from the original Japanese, they might have been listing it in a more arbitrary order that makes sense in that language, but not as much in English. And the color of their outfits even plays into this, as N is the golden console, while M wears a silver version of that outfit. And guess what? Despite gold being regarded over a lot of history as a more significant, more precious, and more valuable metal, it is silver that comes first in the periodic table, and silver is directly above gold. So the color of their outfits is in order with their alphabetical placement as well. Also, while in Ionios, both nations use gold kinda equally as an ornamentation color, so there's no color theory thing there, in the original worlds, you'd be more likely to see whitish or silver colored stuff as ornamentation on things from Xenoblade 1 from various civilizations there. While the Mechon primarily use gold, Mainith herself uses silver as one of her colors. But in the Xenoblade 2 world, you literally have Torna, the Golden Country, which is where the aesthetic of all of Agnes comes from, ultimately. Even in their most separated and antagonistic state, Noah and Mio still take on aspects of each other's background and world and make it their own, which, I don't know, that probably says something about them. Maybe. Someone watching this needs to play Xenoblade 3 and double check. Clearly I haven't played the game yet. And I think it's also probably a deliberate callback to the gods of Xenoblade 1, as Zanza was male, evil, and used gold as a primary color, and Mainith was female, good, and used silver as a primary color. And while we're on the topic of high-up people in Keves and Agnes who ultimately resist Moebius in the end, did you ever think about the queen's names? Like, how Melia's name starts with M, and Nia's name starts with N? This was coincidence. When they named Melia Melia, they didn't have a Xenoblade 2 conceptualized, let alone a Xenoblade 3. And while it seems like they went into making 2 with some inkling of the idea where they might want to go if they got a third game, something tells me they hadn't already decided that the protagonists would be named Noah and Mio, and that there would be a huge amount of depth to their names being that, so this is pure coincidence. Now, I'm not thinking that they literally developed this entire M, N, and alphabet thing in general around all of that, but I think there is a non-zero chance that they either chose Nia to be the ruler of the Xenoblade 2 nation because they had the other MN stuff in there, or expanded on the MN stuff after they realized that Nia was going to be the Agnian queen. Granted, maybe that's not true. They could have also used Nile as the ruler for Agnes. That would have arguably made more sense with how Xenoblade 2 was left off of, and still would have had the MN thing there, but Nile isn't as marketable a character to base the Xenoblade 2 thing on when going up against Melia, who was the protagonist of the previous newest Xenoblade entry prior to Xenoblade 3, and, well, is popular enough to have her own figure, while we don't even have a Morag one yet, let alone Niall Ardenack. That being said, I do think there is a very good chance that Nia ended up being the ruler from a production side, not an in-universe side, because they wanted 2 queens specifically, so Melia's counterpart would have a lot more in common with her, and because Morag explicitly gave up any claim to any throne, and they didn't want to make any sort of definitive choice between Pyra and Mithra, Nia, being probably the 3rd most popular girl from Xenoblade 2, was the correct option, and as I've mentioned plenty of times before, there are enough connecting threads where it would make sense for her to, at the very least, be in charge of the Agnian side of the Origin project, even if, actually, in Alrest, she isn't some sort of major ruler. Anyway, the first most important thing about Melia and Nia is that their letters are swapped from Noah and Mio. We have Noah and Melia from Keves, and Mio and Nia from Agnes. This is also another level of absurd coincidence that might not have really been a coincidence and just kind of all fell into place when they chose Nia to be the Agnian queen, because Mio is Nia's daughter, and Nia's name comes in part from Nya, while Mio's is from Meow. So you have 2 generations of cat girls, whose names are both real Japanese female first names, and also very similar to various languages' onomatopoeia for cat noises, while representing things in terms of Xenoblade 3's alphabet thing. So, yeah, Melia and Nia having swapped letters from Noah and Mio draws the 2 nations together, and shows that they are tied and united across worlds in different ways, and yet, Nia and Mio take different paths towards freeing the world of Moebius, which is represented by the fact that they use different letters. Granted, this only goes one way because Noah and Melia do not have a significant connection at all, and unless Noah is very specifically Dunban's child, as a reference to the Uzuki families of old Xeno games, I do not want him to have a connection at all. I would much prefer it if Noah is literally just some guy, while Mio and maybe Senna are the only people who are actually significantly descended from any party members. Melia, Nia, Shulk, and Rex are party members from previous games and already show up directly helping out this new generation of heroes, while literally everyone else important is inside some Origin medal they're using at some point in time, so it kind of defeats the purpose to just give every party member some strong connection and make the descendants of every single character friends with each other who end up somehow finding each other in the new world and all that stuff. Like, yeah, the 4 Kavesi kids being friends, ending up finding each other in Colony 9 is some act of fate, and something about me thinks that the reason that this Noah is specifically the one that was able to break the cycle wasn't just because of the lingering Moebius stuff from M and N, but also because this was the incarnation where he found all his original friends. That's a bit different than, okay, yeah, the 3 of them were friends, but also Noah is another Shulk and Fiora kid, and Uni is Melia or Tyrea's kid, and Lanz is Vinea's kid, or a kid of Egil's that we didn't know about in the original game, and then Urin is also like Juju's kid or something like that. That's where it gets a little dumb. As is, we've got the 4 Kavesi kids being friends in the original world, and then on the Agnian side, Taion isn't even as close childhood friends with Mio and Senna as they are with each other. They don't really have a 4th person in their backstory like Urin. They're about as close to hacked as the Kavesi seem to have been with Monwa, so that's at least equal. And then Mio and Glimmer just by definition had to have known each other in the original world, but they were not incarnated at the same time, so we didn't actually get to see them interact at all, and that is, I think, an acceptable amount of connections. It would entirely undermine the themes and message of Xenoblade 3 if this new generation of heroes was all entirely descended from the last. I don't want all of the important people in the universe to be from like the same 3 families, because as more generations go down, the kids of each generation of party members slowly get closer to each other and grow up together, so they keep intermarrying and all of a sudden everyone's related. That is the exact opposite of what Xenoblade 3 is all about. Getting back on track, Melia and Nia show explicit connection between Keves and Agnes, and cross things over in a way that is opposite in a complementary way to Noah and Mio. but we can bring them closer together. The M and the N can become much more intertwined than that. So what happens when we have a literal marriage of Keves and Agnes? We're actually going back to the Moebius Noah and Mio for this one, because our Noah and Mio, the final incarnations, only really get to declaring their feelings for each other effectively at the end of the game, and don't really have any time to be in a proper relationship before the worlds are reset. Obviously, time is going to remedy that now that it's allowed to advance again, but in terms of Noah's and Mio's that got into a much closer and more developed relationship, M and N are pretty high up there because, well, they had a biological child, who obviously is a direct combination of the two of them on the most physical level possible for a living being. Down to his DNA, Gondor is one half Keves and one half Agnes. Now, there's no secret letter in between M and N, so they couldn't give him a name that started with that, which would have been kind of funny, but that's not where I'm getting at. You have this kid, who is completely a combination of the two nations, and then he has a kid. And what if that kid has two kids? One of them is a boy who looks a lot like a Hams, similar to his great-grandfather. And the other is a girl who has a kite-shaped core crystal with flesh-eater tendencies and cat ears, like her great-grandmother. What perhaps could those two characters be named? Yeah, so Matthew and Niall's names start with M and N. And hey, would you look at that? The letters are swapped around again, as are all of their associations. Matthew looks a lot like Noah, and Niall looks a lot like Mio, so their physical appearances more closely match the ancestor with the same gender as them. And they more closely resemble someone from the same original world as that person, but everything else is different. The Kevesi-looking boy's name is the one that starts with M, while the Agnian-looking girl's name is the one that starts with N. All entirely opposite from the original Noah and Mio, so when Noah and Mio did the sex to each other, all of those traits got blended together and became so nebulous and not associated with anything that they ended up just being completely swapped due to random distribution after 3 generations. Additionally, just like Noah and Mio, the interactions and character growth that Matthew and Niall have is informed by their love for each other, the people around them, and the world, but through a different light, because they have love between siblings while their ancestors had romantic love. So everything is either mirrored, refaceted, or completely reframed through a different lens across the generations. And there's something poetic about how the first antagonist of the two defeated is Alpha, the one who's only thinking about the future, and he is defeated by Matthew and Niall, the ones remixing the M and N tropes because they're descendants of Noah and Mio, while the one defeated second is Zed, the one who only thinks about the present, who is defeated by Noah and Mio, the current present generation of heroes. So, in the past of the endless present, the future generation defeats the villain obsessed with the future, while after that, but also at the same time, their ancestors, who in real time are the current up-and-coming generation of heroes, defeat the villain who is obsessed with the present in order to make time pass at all and eventually advance to the future so that future generation can exist again in the first place. It sounds mind-melting, and it absolutely is if you somehow made it this far in the video without having actually played Xenoblade 3, but it makes perfect sense and somehow makes it even cooler. I don't understand how this happened. Xenoblade 3 has this really weird phenomenon where, while I initially liked it from a gameplay perspective right out the bat, I was a lot more lukewarm on it from like a storytelling and thematic and that kind of thing perspective, but every time I try to nitpick it from that direction, I end up appreciating it more. I don't know how that works. That doesn't usually happen because I nitpick things too much and it ends up somewhat hampering my enjoyment for them. This has happened and put me in periods of time where I wasn't really interested in talking about Xenoblade 1 or 2 because I got hung up on some small thing that I didn't necessarily like, and that spiraled into me just being a little cooler on them in the past. And yet, Xenoblade 3 just makes me like it more, even though I think it has bigger objective problems than the first two do. I don't understand any of this, but I'm glad I was able to enjoy something I wasn't necessarily as into right off the bat more over time, and gameplay-related nitpicks about Xenoblade 3 are outside the scope of this video, so I'm not going to ruin the moment by talking about any of them. And hey, guess what? Matthew and Niall are a special kind of M and N, because they use M and N to make different names that mean the same thing. Okay, so naturally, this is a Xeno game, so both of their names ultimately do derive from the Bible in some way. Matthew appears to be named after Saint Matthew the Evangelist, one of the 12 apostles, and, you know, the Matthew of the Gospel According to Matthew fame, so that's kinda straightforward. But while Matthew's name comes from the New Testament, Niall's name comes from the Old. While the name itself comes from the Book of Jubilees, a text that is considered apocryphal by most practitioners of both Judaism and Christianity, Niall, at least with the apostrophe there, appears to be an abbreviation of Niall Tamatook. The name Jubilees gives to the wife of Ham, son of Noah, and one of the survivors of the flood who was on the ark. And while, yes, Noah's great-granddaughter and Noah's daughter-in-law are two very different things, the point of being some sort of female descendant of Noah is still there, and they chose this name specifically as opposed to any other one. Like, for example, Jubilees also mentions the names of the wives of two other of Noah's sons, for a very good reason. Niall Tamatook is abbreviated to Niall in Xenoblade 3, which leaves the second half of her name being El, or a Hebrew word meaning God that is in fact used to represent the Abrahamic God in some ancient Hebrew texts of the Bible. That's probably a big deal. But if you remove the apostrophe, you're instead left with just Nell, or something along those lines, N-A-E-L. Now this is, albeit a male name, a name that has several potential meanings and origins. For instance, there is a potential Arabic etymology with roots in the Quran that means brave or winner, but the relevant one here is the Old French etymology, which comes from the same root as Noël, which, you know, has to do with Christmas. You might be getting some religious significance from that there, but specifically, a potential translation of the Old French name Nel is Gift of God. Guess what the Hebrew name that morphed into Matthew in English means? I'll give you a hint. It's also Gift of God. So Noah and Mio view the baby Gondor as a gift. And then that Gondor ends up having descendants whose names both mean Gift of God, but whose actions end up actually freeing the world from a false god. And in doing so, end up somehow paying it backwards, allowing a future incarnation of their ancestors to free the world from the shackles of humanity itself. That's pretty powerful, I think. Maybe. I don't know. You tell me. Seriously though, the fact that they were able to find two different names that have religious backgrounds and meanings that also tie into the Xeno series' religious themes, while also keeping the M and N thing Noah and Mio had, is kind of amazing, and I'm just genuinely impressed with all the moving pieces they had to get to fit together to make all this work, in addition to just straight up lucking out with Melia and Nia also fitting in there. Ultimately though, to close, I haven't talked about Xenoblade X here yet, because quite frankly it just wasn't relevant to the discussion. But the real thesis statement of what I think they were going at with this whole middle of the alphabet thing can easily be summed up by some song lyrics here. Don't worry about the future, it's alright. We're all the same, even if from another world. We don't belong here anymore. And then perhaps most profoundly, look over there. It's gold mine. And what's in the gold mine is the gold mine of content I will be making in the future. So tune in next time for more of that. Until next time, this is Luxon, signing off.